It began with an absence, not of a person or a thing, but of sound. After the divorce, my apartment, a sterile glass and steel box perched on the 37th floor overlooking the sprawling concrete jungle of São Paulo, became a cathedral of silence. Every footstep echoed, every cough was an indictment of the emptiness. I am, or was, a man who thrived on order. Julian Vargas, corporate litigator. My life was a series of logical progressions, of calculated risks and predictable outcomes. The supernatural was a category I filed alongside Santa Claus and honest politicians, amusing fictions for the simple-minded. My world was controllable. My suits were tailored. My schedule was color-coded. My reality was a fortress built of reason and empirical evidence. But loneliness is a subtle acid. It corrodes the foundations of even the strongest fortresses. To combat the oppressive minimalism that my ex-wife, Clara, had once called chic, I decided the apartment needed character. It needed a history that wasn't mine. That's how I found the mirror. It was tucked away in the corner of a dusty antique shop in the Bixiga neighborhood, a place smelling of decaying paper and forgotten lives. It was enormous, a full-length monolith framed in blackened, intricately carved wood. The carvings were strange, a knot of serpents devouring each other's tails, encircling the entire frame. The glass itself was imperfect, wavy in places, with a dark, almost liquid quality, as if it had absorbed a century of shadows. The shopkeeper, a roomy-eyed old man, claimed it was from an old coffee baron's estate. "It has seen much," he'd rasped, a phrase I dismissed as a cheap sales tactic. I bought it, believing its gravitas would fill the void Clara had left behind. I placed it in the long hallway leading from the living room to my bedroom. It did its job, in a way. It made the space feel larger, deeper, but it also made it feel watched. The first few days I barely noticed the anomalies. A flicker of movement at the edge of my vision as I walked past, a shadow in its depths that didn't quite match the shadows in the room. I'd turn, and there would be nothing. Stress, I told myself. Your eyes are playing tricks on you. My logical mind was a well-oiled machine, quick to produce rationalizations. The building is old. The lighting is poor. I'm not sleeping well. Then, the auditory tricks began. A faint whisper, like the sibilant hiss of sand falling on silk, would brush against my hearing as I stood before it, straightening my tie for a day of depositions. I'd pause, straining to listen. Nothing. The sound of the city's ceaseless traffic, the hum of the air conditioner, that was all. My imagination, I concluded. My mind, desperate for companionship, was manufacturing ghosts in the machine. The sense of control, my most prized possession, began to feel like a threadbare blanket. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I was standing in front of the mirror, loosening my tie. I watched my hands move in the dark glass. For a fraction of a second, an impossible, stomach-lurching moment, my reflection's hands stopped moving while mine continued. They rested at its sides, and its head was tilted with an unnerving, curious expression. I blinked, my heart hammering against my ribs, and the illusion shattered. My reflection was perfectly mimicking me again, its face a mask of my own tired confusion. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. It was a trick of the light. It had to be. The warped, antique glass was distorting the image. I repeated the explanation to myself like a mantra, a desperate prayer to the God of reason I had always worshipped. But for the first time in my life, my prayers felt hollow. The fortress of my reality had been breached, not by a battering ram, but by a subtle, silent crack in its foundation. The rationalizations grew thinner with each passing day. The mirror was no longer a piece of furniture. It was a presence, a silent, brooding observer at the heart of my home. My skepticism, once an impenetrable shield, was becoming a flimsy net, and something vast and cold was beginning to slip through its holes. I started avoiding the hallway, taking a longer route through the dining area to get to my bedroom. But its presence was magnetic. I'd find myself standing before it without any memory of having walked there, drawn by an unspoken summons. The reflection became more brazen in its insubordination. I'd be brushing my teeth, And for a fleeting moment, the man in the mirror would offer a slow, knowing smile while my own face was a grimace of minty foam. I'd slam my toothbrush down, splashing water on the counter, and when I looked back, its expression was once again my own. Was I going insane? The thought was more terrifying than any ghost. Madness was the ultimate loss of control, a chaotic abyss from which there was no return. I clung to the idea that this was a psychological breakdown, a symptom of stress and loneliness manifesting in a bizarre, specific way. That was a diagnosis. That was explainable. It was better than the alternative. The whispers evolved. They were no longer formless hisses, but coherent, though faint, words that seemed to ride the edge of my perception. Julian. So alone. They were my own thoughts, my deepest insecurities, given voice and thrown back at me from the depths of the glass. The feeling of being watched intensified until it was a physical pressure, a weight on my skin. My friend Mark, my only real connection to the world outside my firm, came over for a beer. He was my designated skeptic, a man whose worldview was even more rigidly scientific than my own. I needed him to be my anchor to reality. After 2 beers had loosened my tongue, I told him everything, my voice low and trembling. I described the lagging reflection, the whispers, the predatory smile. He listened patiently, his brow furrowed. When I finished, he let out a long sigh. "Julian, listen to yourself," he said, his tone a careful blend of concern and condescension. "You just went through a brutal divorce. You're working killer hours. You're living in this giant empty apartment. You're lonely. Your brain is under immense pressure. You bought an old creepy mirror, and now you're projecting all your anxiety onto it. It's a classic psychological phenomenon. You should really consider talking to someone, a therapist." Every word was a brick, walling me up inside my own experience. He wasn't malicious. He was rational. He was the voice I used to have inside my own head, and he was telling me I was losing my mind. The isolation was now absolute. I was alone with this thing. The breaking point came a week later. I was driven by a frantic need for answers, for any explanation that wasn't my own incipient madness. I began examining the mirror itself, running my hands over every inch of the serpentine frame. My fingers caught on a small, almost invisible seam in the woodwork at the bottom. With a trembling hand, I pressed on it. A section of the frame clicked open, revealing a small, hollow cavity. Inside lay a small, leather-bound diary, its pages yellow and brittle with age. My heart pounded as I opened it. The ink was faded, the handwriting a spidery, increasingly frantic script. It was dated 1928. The author was a man named Afonso. He had bought the mirror just as I had, to fill a void in his life after the death of his wife. The initial entries were filled with hope. He believed it was a scrying glass, a tool to contact the other side. Then the tone shifted. October 12th, 1928. I see him more clearly now, in the glass. He looks like me, but stronger. His eyes hold no sadness. He watches me. I believe he is a version of me from a better world. November 3rd, 1928. He spoke to me today. Not with a voice, but in my mind. He knows my sorrow. He promises to take it away. He calls himself the Shade. He only asks that I look upon him, that I give him my attention. It is a small price to pay. The pages turned faster, Afonso's descent charted in smeared ink. He wrote of how the Shade began to advise him in business, leading to great success, but it demanded more and more of his time, more of his focus. It fed on his attention, on his emotions. December 21st, 1928. I am a prisoner. The Shade is no longer just in the mirror. I see him in the polished silverware in the window panes at night. He shows me terrible things. He twists my memories. He says my wife never loved me. He says my success is his, not mine. He is growing stronger, and I am fading. The final entry was barely legible, the pen having torn through the fragile paper in places. January 5th, 1929. It wants out. It promised me everything, but it took everything. All I had to do was agree to let it, share. A moment of weakness. It's out. It wears my face. My family doesn't see the difference. God help whoever finds this mirror next. Don't listen to it. Don't look at it. It sees you. It's always watching. It feeds on being seen. A cold dread, purer and more absolute than anything I had ever known, washed over me. This was not in my head. This was real. Afonso's terror echoed across a century and found a home in my heart. My eyes shot up from the diary, across the room to the hallway where the mirror stood. And my reflection, the shade, was not mimicking me. My own body was frozen, my face a mask of horror. But the man in the mirror was standing tall, his posture confident, and he was smiling. It was not the fleeting, subtle smile from before. This was a wide, triumphant, predatory grin that stretched my face into an inhuman mask. He slowly raised a hand and gave me a small, mocking wave. The game of subtlety was over. It knew that I knew. The apartment, my fortress of solitude, had become a cage, and I was locked inside with my predator. The days that followed were a descent into a waking nightmare. The shade was no longer content to be a passive observer. It became an active tormentor. Its whispers were no longer at the edge of hearing but were clear, insidious injections of poison directly into my mind. Clara left because you are weak, Julian. Mark thinks you're pathetic. You have nothing. You are nothing. It weaponized every reflective surface. A casual glance at my darkened phone screen would reveal its grinning face looking back. The polished marble of the kitchen island held its distorted image. The windows at night became dark canvases for its performance, showing me horrific tableaus. Clara, her face twisted in contempt, kissing a version of me that radiated a dark confidence. Mark, lying in a pool of blood, his face frozen in a silent scream. I knew they weren't real, but the images were seared into my brain, fueling the paranoia that gnawed at my sanity. The psychological warfare escalated into physical incursions. A freezing cold spot would drift through the room, raising goosebumps on my arms. I would leave a room and return to find a single object moved. A book on the floor, a chair turned to face the mirror. I took to barricading my bedroom door at night, but I would wake to the sound of the handle being slowly, deliberately turned. Sleep offered no escape, only dreams of endless, identical hallways lined with mirrors, each reflecting a more monstrous version of myself. I had to get rid of it. The thought became an obsession. One afternoon, fueled by a cocktail of caffeine and terror, I grabbed a heavy blanket and threw it over the mirror. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, I felt a surge of victory. Then, the whispering started again, louder now, muffled and distorted, coming from underneath the heavy fabric. You can't hide from me, Julian. I am you. In a fit of rage, I tore the blanket off. Staring at my own enraged face in the glass, I grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace I never used. "Get out of my house!" I screamed, my voice raw. I swung the poker with all my strength. Time seemed to slow down. As the iron arced towards the glass, my reflection, the shade, moved with impossible speed. It didn't flinch. Instead, it smiled, and its own hand came up, holding a jagged shard of what looked like broken mirror glass. As my poker was about to make contact, the shade dragged the shard across its own throat. An excruciating burning pain erupted in my neck. I dropped the poker, and my hands flew to my throat. I looked down. A thin, perfectly straight line of blood was welling up on my skin. I stared back at the mirror, gasping. The shade stood there, untouched, its smile wider than ever, a silent testament to its power. I was tethered to it. Harming the mirror meant harming myself. Escape was the only option. I packed a bag in a frenzy, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip it. I had to get out, go to a hotel, Mark's place, anywhere. I reached the front door, my hand on the handle. And then it hit me. A wave of vertigo and crippling panic so intense my knees buckled, my heart hammered, my vision swam with black spots. The thought of stepping outside, of leaving the confines of the apartment, was suddenly more terrifying than the entity itself. It was an irrational, chemically pure terror. The shade didn't need locks to keep me here. It had the keys to my own mind. I was a prisoner. The following days bled into one another in a haze of fear. I lost my job. My phone buzzed with unanswered calls from my office and then from Mark, before finally falling silent. The world outside ceased to exist. My reality had shrunk to the walls of my apartment. I became a creature of the shadows, avoiding reflective surfaces, subsisting on whatever was left in my pantry. I was losing weight, my eyes were sunken, and my hands trembled constantly. I had begun to look like the ghost I was living with. The crisp, logical lawyer was gone, replaced by a haunted, paranoid shell of a man. The shade, meanwhile, seemed to thrive on my despair. In the fleeting glimpses I caught of it, it looked healthier, more vibrant, its presence more solid. It was feeding on my life, draining me one terrified breath at a time. I was not just being haunted, I was being consumed. There was nothing left of the man I once was. The rational mind had been shattered, the walls of logic reduced to rubble. All that remained was a primal, cornered animal operating on instinct and abject terror. I was at the bottom of the abyss, and the only thing left to do was to look up at the monster that had brought me here. The confrontation was not a choice. It was an inevitability. I was starving, dehydrated, and my mind was a frayed rope about to snap. I stumbled out of my bedroom, drawn one last time towards the hallway. The shade stood waiting in the mirror, no longer a mere reflection, but an almost solid presence. It looked exactly like me, but whole, healthy, radiating a confident energy that I had long since lost. "It's time, Julian," its voice echoed in my skull, calm and reasonable. "This struggle is pointless. You are exhausted. Let me help. I can give you everything back. Clara, your career, your life. All you have to do is let me in. Let us share. We can be whole together." The offer was seductive. A cool stream in a burning desert. The thought of ending the fear, the loneliness, was intoxicating. My will was a flickering candle flame, and its words were a gust of wind. But in that moment of ultimate despair, a different thought ignited, a spark of defiance from the diary of a man dead for almost 100 years. It feeds on being seen. It fed on my fear, my despair, my attention. It had grown strong by consuming my identity. Violence was useless. Barricades were useless. The only way to fight it was to starve it. I took a deep, shuddering breath and forced myself to walk forward until I was inches from the glass. The shade smiled, its eyes gleaming with triumph. It thought I was surrendering, but I didn't look at it. With every ounce of strength I had left, I forced my gaze away from its triumphant eyes and found my own. I looked past the doppelganger and saw myself, the sunken cheeks, the wild, terrified eyes, the trembling lips. I saw the broken, hollowed-out man I had become, and I accepted it. I acknowledged the pain of my divorce, the bitterness of my loneliness, the terror that had consumed me. I owned it. It was my suffering, not its food. "You are my emptiness," I whispered, my voice a dry rasp. "You are my fear, and you are nothing without me." The smile on the shade's face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then rage. It felt the shift. It was losing its grip. I needed to sever the connection completely. My eyes darted to the floor, where the iron poker lay. Next to it was a shard of glass from a fallen picture frame, a casualty of one of my earlier paranoid fits. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, I snatched the shard of glass from the floor. The shade in the mirror mirrored the action, its face now a mask of pure fury. It knew what I was going to do. It lunged forward inside the mirror, its hands pressing against the glass as if trying to break through. But it was too late. I didn't scream. I acted. I stared into my own terrified eyes, the last reflection I would ever see, and I drove the shard of glass into my right eye, then my left. A supernova of white-hot agony exploded in my head. The world dissolved into a symphony of pain and darkness. The last thing I heard before unconsciousness claimed me was a piercing, inhuman shriek, a sound of rage and starvation, not from the room, but from the depths of my own mind. fading into silence. They found me 3 days later. The official story was a psychotic break. Julian Vargas, the brilliant lawyer, unable to cope with his divorce, had a complete mental collapse and blinded himself. I spent months in a sterile facility where therapists tried to help me rebuild the narrative of my life with their sensible, logical bricks of repressed trauma and stress-induced psychosis. I let them. It was easier than the truth. I live in a small ground-floor apartment now. The world is a tapestry of sounds, smells, and textures. My new life is a fragile one, built in perpetual darkness. I have no mirrors. The windows are covered with thick blackout curtains. I navigate my home through memory and touch. There is a strange peace in the darkness, a safety in not having to see my own face, or what might be looking back from it. I am a survivor, but survival is not victory. It is a permanent state of vigilance. The knowledge of what exists on the other side of the glass is a scar carved directly onto my soul. I am forever a witness to a truth the sane world refuses to see. Most nights, I find a semblance of peace, but sometimes a deep, unnatural chill will settle in the room. In those moments, I turn my head towards the blank, dark screen of the small television I keep for the news. I can't see a thing, of course, but I can listen, and sometimes, very faintly from the silent, black void of the screen, I hear a familiar whisper, a sound like sand on silk curling into my ear. I'm still here, Julian, and in the darkness, I can see for both of us.